we're kind of losing who we are, I think, a bit. And so thinking about that and thinking maybe about people coming and visiting here, the government's now admitting there's some 57 different types visiting us and have been probably for thousands of years. It's not new. And maybe they even put us here, who knows? They're keeping eye on us. So that's where my book began. And every day I was driving to work and I was conducting tours at this hotel to the casino and the spa and all these things. So in between tours I would make notes, and I had these notes all stuffed in my pockets. And when I'd get home, I would put them into the computer. And that was the beginning of the book in 1997.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the podcast. I have a guest with me today, another author. We love our authors here on Living the Next Chapter. And we're going to be talking about a book that it sounds really interesting to me. I'm really enthralled to talk about this. There's a lot of great stories behind the writing of this book. And Marilynn is with me today, and a Canadian author. So that's even better, right? So we're going to talk all things writing and a little bit about our book. Welcome to the podcast. How are you today?
Oh, I'm great.
Thank you for making time for us today. I really appreciate it. I would love to kind of let the audience know where you are in the world and a little bit about you, and then we'll start talking about the book.
Okay, I live in British Columbia in the Okanagan Valley, which is in the south central part of British Columbia. And the Okanagan crosses the border into Washington State. It's Canada's only true desert at the southern end, but we also have orchards and vineyards. It's a four-season playground. We have one lake that's 83 miles long, and we have a lot of tourists all year round. We have ski hills up above the valley in the wintertime. It's very beautiful. People do alpine biking and hiking up in those areas, and they go skiing in the winter. And so there's lots to do here. It's really beautiful. And it's just a very rare place in Canada. Some people call it the California of Canada. And I've been to California many times, and actually the Napa and Sonoma valleys are very similar to the Okanagan.
So what do you love to do there in your free time, enjoying this beautiful part of the country?
Well, I live out in a rural area now, and we're surrounded by farms, even though I'm in a subdivision. So there's lots of areas to ride a bike or walk, and, just walk over to the neighbors and get outdoors. And I have a big yard. And those are things you often don't have in a more city environment. So I really enjoy just being in nature. And when I'm writing, it's really quiet around here. Everybody's gone to work or school. So I have the subdivision to myself, and I can just sit and write. And if I want to sit outside with the computer,
Nice.
It's great.
So you've already mentioned this already, your writing journey. I'd love to know a little bit about your journey as an author so that people listening can understand maybe where you started and what inspired you to become a writer.
Well, my great-grandmother, or not great, but my grandmother, Minda Ostrom, who was a teacher, she was of Swedish descent, born in Minnesota, and later the family moved to Saskatchewan. And my parents, and my mother's parents and my dad's parents, they lost everything during what they called the dirty 30s. They had to just board up their farms and walk away. And my grandmother had taught in a one-room schoolhouse, but when she got out to BC, she was told she'd have to go back to university and get recertified. So she had to do other things. She couldn't work as a teacher because she couldn't afford that. But when I came along, she started teaching me to read. I think I was only 2. And by the time I was 4, I was reading fluently, and I used to read all the billboards and the signs when we were driving by. And by the time I got into grade one, I started writing. And my teachers would put my writing into these adjudication contests that we had back then. By the time I was 9, I remember writing a Halloween story, and my teacher put it in the local paper. So it started very early. And throughout my working life, people I've worked for, or when I've had my own businesses, I've had columns in the newspaper. I've done, ad copy for businesses, all that kind of stuff. But I always wanted to be a creative writer. And at college, I took creative writing and English literature and language and started writing children's stories at that time, one of which I'd still like to get published. But my journey into writing science fiction kind of came around in a roundabout way. During the 70s and 80s, I did a lot of RVing. I spent a lot of time in the American Southwest. I came across UFOs down there. Also in our own area here in the Okanagan, we're in a UFO corridor that extends all the way up to Alaska. We see these things all the time. So many people do, and we don't report them. I've never reported any of it. But when I first started this book, I'd been through divorce, and I was having to fend for myself in some pretty lousy jobs because there wasn't much else available. And I became very concerned about our socioeconomic problems. And I thought, well, I'll write a book about that, what it's like for women working in this country, low wages, bad pay, bad working conditions. And I started with that, but then I thought, this is going to be a really sad book and kind of depressing. And I don't think anybody's going to want to read it. And I was commuting that time, an hour and a half every day to a hotel I was working at in a neighboring city. And I kept passing this little lake where I'd seen a UFO back in 1989. And people were seeing it all over the area. It was on the radio while I was driving home. And I remember stopping on a lookout and looking out the passenger side window, and I could see this silver disc. It was just hanging over the lake. And it was interesting, and I didn't think too much of it. It was in the fall and it was getting cold, so I just drove home. But I kept passing this lake a good 10 years later, and I began to think, I wonder what they would think of us, the way we are with one another, the way we treat each other, the way we make use of each other in our society, and, how selfish people are nowadays. And we seem to be losing our connection with one another. I remember reading somewhere that the fastest growing household now was the single person household where people live with their dog or their cat. Those are the, and of course I live at home with my dog by myself. And I thought, oh boy, I guess I'm in fashion now. But it seems like, people are kind of losing this contact. I've seen people sitting in the same waiting room, waiting for the doctor, and they're texting each other, and they're sitting right next to each other. We're kind of losing who we are, I think, a bit. And so thinking about that and thinking maybe about people coming and visiting here, the government's now admitting there's some 57 different types visiting us and have been probably for thousands of years. It's not new. And they even put us here, who knows? Yeah. Keeping eye on us. So that's where my book began. And every day I was driving to work, and I was conducting tours at this hotel to the casino and the spa and all these things. So in between tours I would make notes, and I had these notes all stuffed in my pockets. And when I'd get home, I would put them into the computer. And that was the beginning of the book in 1997. Wow.
So this has been a labor of love then over the years as you kind of been putting this together, right?
Yes. Well, I had to work such long hours. Sometimes I was working 6 to 7 days a week, and sometimes 4 nights as well. And then my parents became elderly and sick, and there was no one else to look after them. Everybody was busy with family. So I was
Wow.
it. And, I just didn't have time to just sit and write. That was a luxury. And now I have that time. I'm retired and I just love it. I spend more of the time dreaming up things.
Where does your creative drive come from?
I'm kind of a deep thinker. I'm an introvert, but I'm very observant of people and what's going on around me and politics all around the world and why these terrible wars start. And often they seem to be driven by money. That seems
Money and
to be
power,
the bottom
right?
line.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
the two go hand in hand. In fact, money created power. So in my book, this planet, Morvana, has no money. They dropped it because they discovered that that was what created the class system. It divided people and it created the poor and the rich. And they decided that because of their spiritual beliefs, which have grown over time, that every living thing was precious and that all people deserve an upper middle class lifestyle. And because of all the food they grow and the way they treat their planet, they have all the resources to take care of everybody evenly. So there are no rich or poor. There is no group struggling to social climb. There are no oppressors, people trying to kick other people down the ladder. Everybody works together. And when children are born, they're observed. I think much like I was as a child by my grandmother. And people watch them to see what they're good at, what talents they have, because it always shows up early.
Yep.
It really does. And by the time they're in school and college, it's pretty well settled as to what they will do for their livelihood. And in effect, what they do is they work at that, whatever it is. It doesn't matter whether it's in the arts or whether it's being a doctor or a horticulturist or whatever. That's what they contribute to the planet. They just contribute their labor. Everybody does that.
So your book is like a response to our current day, and if this would be a better place to live if we can live like this. Is that kind of how the book is framed?
That's how I feel about it. I've thought about this for a very long time. It may sound pretentious on my part, but I really feel that we can do this. But it's really up to us. We have the potential. We can do this, but is it probable? Are people really going to want to give up their ideas about money and always running around striving for money? I mean, if radishes were the currency, everybody wouldn't be running around gathering radishes, Yeah. It's so stupid because money, what can you do with it? When the conquistadors were conquering South America, the natives there were very perplexed. And they said to the Spanish, well, what do you do with gold? Do you eat it? What do you do with it? They could not understand the concept of money. And they were an agricultural society. They had amazing gardens, and they developed all sorts of fruits and vegetables. Like at least 50% of what we eat today comes out of South America. People tried to say that, the Native Americans were not using the land, but they were. They were all cultivating. Even in Canada,
they were using it, and they were valuing it, and they were good stewards of it. Right. And
That's right.
yeah, and that's one thing that's been lost, I think, as well. Right.
Yes, they developed corn, they developed different kinds of potatoes in South America that will grow at
Yeah.
different altitudes. And they had irrigation systems. And people would be asked to go for a year to the capital and donate their labor. If they were weavers or whatever they were, they did that for a year and then they went home. And everybody rotated and took turns
A community.
doing these things.
Yeah.
Yes. And everybody had the goods they needed. They had all the food they needed. So they were perplexed by this idea of gold. You know, for them, it was something you sprinkled around to worship the gods with. It wasn't valued like we.
It's funny, right? If you put it again to radishes, if radishes were the highest valued item in the world, it'd be like, I can just see somebody like, a radish? Like, that's a side dish garnish. I don't understand. Why is this so valuable to you? Right? It just seems absurd. Yeah.
It does. And, you know, the thing is, if you were lost somewhere in the wilderness, would you rather have a bag of gold or a bag of food? You know,
what do you value at that moment? Right. That's right. Yeah. So I love that your book is a response to our current day situation. Again, we haven't mentioned the full name of the title of the book as well. Can you mention that as well?
It's called Exit to Morvana. My protagonist has had a really tough time, and she is really fed up, and she meets this person who's very unusual, but he can pass as human. And he's been here about 40 years. He turns out to be kind of a missionary from this planet, and he's about to return. And she gets to go back to Morvana with him. And it's a really interesting journey. It takes them several months to get there. And they take several thousand people with them because the Morvanians think that the way the world is going on this planet, we're going to do what we've done twice before with Lemuria and Atlantis. We're going to blow ourselves up. Both those times, we've reached very high levels of technology. We had the bomb, and the next thing we knew, we blew ourselves up. And so they're taking several thousand people with them so that if they have to come back later and repopulate the earth again, they will have these people. So they're taking them, but they're educating them along the way. So it's taking a while to reach Morvana. So everybody is being tested as to what they're good at, what they like to do. And then they're being oriented to where they will be working once they reach Morvana. And everybody will work together and be accepted. Nobody gets a free ride. You can't just sit if you go there. You have to do something, but they look to see what your talents are. And then you contribute that.
What I like about this, Marilynn, is that there's this undercurrent, as you're describing your book, that it's not just a story, but it's a commentary on our current situation and how things could be better. How do you feel as a person would read this book? What are you hoping that they come away with about what our world could be like if we did a better job of living our lives as a community?
Well, I see some hopeful signs in the younger generations, and they're beginning to value the ecology. They're starting to see how ridiculous it is to live in places that are nothing but cement in cities. People are starting to do gardens on rooftops and, grow some of their own vegetables and things, even when they're in a little plot in a big city where they can find a piece of ground. They're starting to actually grow food, learn how food is grown, because a lot of people don't know how that's grown. I was very lucky coming from families that were pioneer families that went back to the 16 and 1700s in North America. because they had always worked on farms and we always had a big kitchen garden. And so my parents were always showing me about how to plant things. And so I learned that at an early age. But I don't think a lot of young people who grow up in cities really have that opportunity. I think these kids are doing it for themselves to a large extent. And I think this is what has to be done. You see them out there talking to people in government, starting to protest the things that are going on. And to me, this is the beginning. Because right now, especially if you look at the United States, they have some really horrible people in power who obviously do not care about anything or anybody, just fighting out with their politics, trying to get power over one another, take over, and be that top 1% that controls everything and controls people. And the young people are saying, wait a minute, I don't want to be controlled like that. I want to participate. And this is what Morvana is like. Everybody participates. Everybody contributes. And also in their politics there, from an early age, children are taught that they have a responsibility towards their own democracy. The democracy doesn't come for free. You have to nurture it. And everybody has to serve in some capacity in government. And since there's no money connected with it and no real power in that way, everybody does their duty and then they're happy to go home. You don't get these people hanging on till they're 80 years old, still trying to run the government when they should have retired long ago. I mean, that's just pathetic.
And it sounds like there's no one gets a free ride, and you just sit and enjoy the efforts of everyone else. Everyone's contributing. Everybody's part of the solution, right?
Yes. And entertainment and art are considered just as important as anything else because we seem to need that as human beings. Psychologically, we do need that. We are drawn to that. So the artists and the equivalent of movie stars or things that they have on their planet, they get all the accolades and awards and things. There's just no money involved. Everybody has such a high standard of living that they don't have to strive to actually, earn money just so that they can live. Everybody already has that in place. And so everybody's on a playing field that's equal.
Can you explain the meaning behind the name Morvana as well?
Yes. I was thinking that this would be, I guess, a Utopian style planet. And I was thinking of Nirvana. And then I thought, well, people might want more of it.
I love it. See?
Oh, I put the two together.
You're creating your own words. I love this.
But then one day I looked it up just for fun. And it turns out it's an old ancient Celtic name from Wales that goes back hundreds of years. It's a woman's name, like some sort of goddess name. Or
is there a meaning attached to the name then too?
I think there is. I've just forgotten what it was. I remember I saved it somewhere. I'd have to look it up again. But it has kind of this ancient goddess connotation, perhaps from a time when women were running things, which we know now that did happen in the past. Like, for instance, they've been digging up Viking graves where warriors are buried, and they found 20% of them are women, which really shocked people. And they had what they called shield maidens. And I have Scandinavian background on my mother's side. So I thought that was pretty interesting.
It's amazing. Well, I love, again, to go back to it, I love that people are today more and more finding their voice and being part of the solution, to instead of just lamenting or complaining or whatever about how things are. There's another thing you can do. You can actually step forward and offer a suggestion, offer a solution, and create maybe this world that we're longing for, even in small little steps. You talk about just creating a garden. That's a small little step. Anyone can do this. It's very easy to do. And now you're part of the solution. Again, instead of hoping that someone else will do it, hoping our politicians will do it, hoping that, the rich will do it. Well, you know what? We can do something. And it's on us to do whatever we can to the best of our ability. And I kind of think that would lead us to a better place down the road.
I do too. And that's why I feel that this is kind of my little contribution to, maybe because I am creative and because I think about these things a lot, putting it down in a story that people can read that I hope is entertaining. I hope they have fun with it too, but that they also maybe see some solutions. For instance, with no money, the Morvanians don't have to fight to fund research for science and illness. They have come up such a long way because of that. They can just do the research, and people live now for thousands of years. They've learned to turn off the aging process. And as I said in the beginning of the book, before they take her on the mothership, they examine her and they put these little tiny microbots, they inject them into her bloodstream, which go through her whole body and look for illness or anything like that. And they connect to the computers, and these little bots can do surgeries, they can do all kinds of things. So it's very less invasive than what we have today for our surgeries. And they leave these inside you. And so when you go for checkups, they just hook you up to the computer and these things can report. And so you find things very early and can remove them. So this is just one of my ideas. But
so were these some of the ideas that you were writing at work and sticking in your pocket, where you're like, oh, it'd be great if we had this, or we had this, or we had this, and you just let your mind go to that place? Interesting.
Yeah, I'm like that. When I'm doing something else, my mind is often one octave above it, somewhere in my head, thinking about something else. And I've always kind of been that way. But I really would like to see our planet become Morvana one day. I really believe we have the potential, that we have everything we need. And I love my country. I think Canada is the best country in the world. And, we're a mosaic of people, and we are living on a planet now that globally is multicultural. People are becoming more and more mixed. You see more and more mixed marriages. People are moving all over the world just to live or to travel, or they get promotions with companies or the military. They're marrying into those countries. Sometimes they decide to live there permanently. And so it's a very different world now, and we're interdependent upon one another for commerce and trade. And the biggest business of all is tourism. It's billions of dollars every year. And so we can't really afford to have wars. Wars are stupid now. Because if you kill off the people who are buying your goods,
that's your audience, right? Yes,
to sell to. Like China's been doing a lot of saber rattling, but in the end, I don't believe it'll come to anything, because they're manufacturing all this stuff and they need us to buy it. So what are they going to do? They're not going to attack us. No. They've discovered capitalism. And once countries discover that, they're not going to go out and kill off the people who are buying
So
their
who
stuff.
is your target audience for this book? Did you have somebody in mind when you were writing?
I hope it will be a fairly wide-ranging audience, but particularly people who love to read science fiction, who love to sort of think in this way, and perhaps a slightly futuristic way, looking a little bit more like a visionary rather than just telling a story, but also trying to really visualize what something like this would be like. This planet, for instance, they don't make war anymore. They don't have any guns or anything to speak of. So they learned to put these energy bands around the planet above the atmosphere so that nothing can come through and they're protected. Their prison is on one of their moons. So that is also away from their planet. And now they only have about 5 people in there because, happy people don't make war or go robbing other people or doing stuff. So they're very slowly getting to the point where they may not have any.
So there's a reduction in desperation then. People aren't acting out of desperation and,
absolutely.
Self-focused that they want to just provide for themselves or steal from others, right? You don't need that.
That's right. No. Okay. You don't need to because you've got everything. And their homes are self-contained. Everything gets composted and used, all the refuse and everything. Every home has a computer that runs everything. And that's where I brought in my robot, You Do It, who is kind of an interesting character. The family's owned him for thousands of years. And he manifests as looking quite human when he comes out of the computer. And he doesn't have much experience because he's always lived in this house that belongs to the family. And on Morvana, most people get rid of the old robots and get new ones because they want something more fashionable or more fun, I guess. But the family became very fond of him. And when Samantha gets there, she discovers he's a sentient being. He has feelings. He understands things. And she's starting to think, is this really fair? Because they've made him kind of a slave. And do we have a right to create artificial intelligence and then, just ignore them and not acknowledge them as an entity that has feelings? So she starts giving him some leeway at home. And she lets him make his own clothes, and he does a few other fun things.
It's amazing. Okay, so Marilynn, this is great. Like I love how you've approached this, and I love how you are working towards a solution. How do people find the book? That's always good to let people know how they can get a copy of this book. And then I'm just gonna get to your closing thoughts about why this book is important to the readers.
You can go to my website, morvana.ca, and it lists a lot of the sites that my book is featured on, Amazon sites and so on. Or you can go straight to Amazon or Indigo Books or a number of other sites of that nature, and you can buy the book there. You can get it either in an ebook or in a paperback.
That's great. And just some thoughts about, what this world could be like if we were a little bit more like this planet. How can our world be better?
I think it would be better for everyone because everyone, I think, would be healthier, happier, so you wouldn't have so much mental illness. Like we have a lot of mental illness in our society, and I think it comes from people's lives, the way they have to live and work, so much pressure. I think that if medical research could not have to fight for funding and compete for funding, that we would be far more advanced with cancer, all of those things. If we put the things first that really, really matter, instead of going to Wall Street and playing the stock market and trying to get rich, if people would really look at preserving our planet, which is in trouble right now, thanks to us. And if you make things better for everybody in a country, a country is only as strong as its weakest link. So we have a lot of poverty, a lot of poor people, a lot of bad health. One thing we do have in Canada is a medical program, although it needs to be improved. At least we have something. You go to the biggest country, the most powerful country in the world, and they don't have a comprehensive medical program yet. And you have a lot of poverty and violence in the cities, people getting on drugs just to stop their own pain. And I think all those things would begin to disappear if people had real equality and real happiness, because happiness comes from living a good life. And when you're rushing from job to job, you're working hard. Some people are working 2 or 3 jobs. Their health suffers, especially if they do a lot of night shift. And when you have an unhealthy population, you have all kinds of problems.
So I love that this book will get people to think about what things could be better. And not only that, not only think about it, but what action steps can we take towards making it better. It's a great combination. Marilynn, thank you so much for being part of the podcast. Really enjoyed your conversation with you today. And I hope everyone goes out and grabs the book, because this sounds like something that could really inspire some change in our lives. So I really appreciate your time today.
Yes, and I'd like some feedback from people. If they go to my website, on the last page, there's a place where they can comment and send it to me. And I would like to hear from some people if they do buy the book.
Beautiful. Everyone, please do that. That's great. Thank you so much, Marilynn, for your time.
Oh, thank you.
Awesome. Hey guys, thank you for listening to the podcast. Jump over to livingthenextchapter.com, our website, and you will see a spot where you can leave a voice message. We'd love to hear your feedback. We're trying to make it as easy as possible to hear from you. So if you want your voice on this podcast, yes, that's possible. Go to livingthenextchapter.com, click the little microphone icon, leave a voice message. And we'll insert your message into the podcast. Tell us where you're listening from. Tell us your favorite guest. Maybe there's a guest we should have on the podcast. Maybe you should be our next guest. Leave us a message at livingthenextchapter.com. Again, thank you so much for listening. Please share this podcast episode with one person. That's all we're asking. Meet you over there at livingthenextchapter.com. Thank you for listening. Thank you for sharing. Love to hear from you. Till the next episode. It's coming up right away. Be sure you hit that subscribe button. Thank you for being part of Living the Next Chapter. Thank you for supporting our guests. Great day.